Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Let's Slow Down podcast. I have Dana K. White here with me today, decluttering expert and author. She has her own podcast. I'm so excited to talk to her. Dana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is so fun.
So much fun. You have a new book coming out,
Hmm.
which we'll be talking about today. Congratulations. It's your
Thank you.
fourth. That is a huge accomplishment. And I got to read a little advanced copy, so I feel very privileged. It's called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House, and it's a bit different from your others as it's about your own spiritual growth, which happened to coincide with your growing understanding of how to declutter and keep a house under control. So, your previous books are all about cleaning and decluttering. I loved them, I've read them, but they didn't include spiritual content. So, what made this the right time to share the spiritual side of your journey?
Well, so I think it comes down to why was it important to not have spiritual content in the first books, right? Because, like you said, my story is that I had no intentions of teaching any of this kind of stuff to people because I am the last person who I ever thought would be teaching this stuff, right? And so in the beginning, I had started a blog. I was trying to stay focused, get it figured out as a way to practice writing to then be able to write about things later that I actually felt qualified to write about, right? So in the beginning, it was anonymous and all that. And so as I was working on my house, I kept expecting that God was going to like finally show me the verse or you know help me understand some spiritual content concept that like was going to make me go, oh, no, I get it, that's what I've been missing. Now it's easy to keep my house under control, right? Like I thought I was missing something along the way, and instead as I worked on my house and I figured out my house, God just kept showing me. He was like, hello, like, I have never cared about your messy house. I just care about your heart. Like, what I care about you and all that. And like, I'm not horrified by your messy house or anything like that. And so it was really important for me personally to take that shame away that I had felt. And whether somebody is a Christian or not, spiritual or not, there is a lot of shame around this issue when, like me, if someone is like I was, that it was like I didn't know why this was so hard for me, right? Like I could not understand. I thought I was the only one. I couldn't understand how it seemed to be so easy for everybody else in the world and so difficult for me, right? And so that shame being gone, especially as a Christian woman who, for some reason, right or wrong, we often get this vibe and idea that if I'm a Christian woman and I'm a good Christian woman, this stuff is supposed to be easy for me, right? And so I was like, well, it's not. So what does that mean about, me spiritually? And so it was really important for those first books to not mix that in. And I don't think that people who have tried to use spiritual inspiration and encouragement in this stuff meant to make me feel ashamed. I don't think that was their intention at all. But because I was seeing it through my filter of shame over this issue, it, I it was very disheartening, and it just served to discourage me more when I was like, I still don't get it. And now I feel spiritually guilty, right? And so I didn't want to have those things mixed together. But there is the reality that there is the identity piece of this, right? Like the shame
Yes.
part of it. And so uh, I wanted to share my faith because that's the most important thing to me. But I also just wanted to dive into that shame part of things and how we don't need to feel the shame over this struggle, and letting go of that shame is actually the thing that allowed me to move forward. Like accepting that this is how my brain works. My brain is not broken. I am not defective. My brain works the way it's supposed to work. And I'm actually grateful for it because it's my creative brain that I'm very thankful for, that is actually directly related to the fact that I struggle with physical stuff, right? Like keeping it under control. And when I accepted that and said, this is part of how my brain works, then I didn't feel like a failure because traditional organizing advice didn't work for me. It gave me the freedom to say, okay, then what does work for me and how my brain works? Because most people who write about this stuff, their brains work very differently from the way my brain works, right? And so that's why I was always lost. So letting go of that shame is an important piece of the puzzle. And so that's why I wanted to, you know, bring that around. And also just the fact that I love my people, you know? And so I want to share this big part of my heart with my people.
I love that. And it's so relatable. And it's like you said, turn to some of these books and I'm someone who falls kind of in between, I
Mhm.
think your background and the, typical type A organizer. So I have a little bit different background. I was okay at it,
Mhm.
but once I was married and had 3 kids and threw all that into the mix, that's when I hit like the overwhelm. And I did feel the shame. And you do feel like, why can't I keep up with this? You can't help but go there. What's wrong with me?
Mhm.
Why can't I figure this out? And then throw social media into the mix and it's like all bets are off and you're never going to feel good about yourself again if you keep
Right.
those thoughts up.
Right.
So it's so true. And just accepting we're all wired differently. So what
Yeah.
is going to work for us? I think this book is going to help a lot of people in that they can relate to it and they will get over that piece of it and they'll be like, okay, well, this is what I'm working with. This is how I am wired. And
Right.
God made us all for a reason and he doesn't make mistakes. So
Right.
you're right on point. You're right where you're supposed to be, but this is what can help me. These processes, this mindset is so often, I think, the biggest piece of the puzzle that we're missing. And it's right there and it's available to us if we let ourselves go there.
Yeah.
So I think this is great. You had mentioned finding this balance between messiness not being a spiritual issue and everything being a spiritual issue, which I
Right.
loved because when I first heard the title and I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, I don't know if I've really ever connected the two per se. But then again, it's all connected, right? And it's all a spiritual issue. And God is part of every part of our life, our faith. And um, so how do you strike a balance if you do? Is there a balance?
Yeah, there's for sure a balance. And actually there's a chapter about balance and how balance I used to think balance meant and now that I think about it, I go, what? Why did I think that? But I do think a lot of us think that reaching a place of balance is reaching a place of relaxation. And that is absolutely not true. Like if you've ever done yoga, you know that balance is intense, right? Like you
Sure
use
is. Yes.
so many muscles that you don't even know that you even have in this balance. But it's this weird thing of like tension, but also letting go at the same time. Like you can't balance harder. So it's really a place of tension. And that tension is that it ultimately comes down to my heart. So the title is Jesus doesn't care about your messy house. He cares about your heart, right? And so your heart is the driving factor. That's what God is looking for in me, you know. So my house, yes, it may be messy because I don't see incremental mess and I get caught up in something and the house gets out of control again, right? And so that in and of itself, it's just the way I'm wired to be. But then if I don't let somebody come in the front door who needs a place to be because I'm embarrassed, well, then that's my pride, right? And so I have to let them come in. But at the same time, if I'm hesitant to, then I need to work on my house. And so it all works together, right? But like I also go into in the book, I'm like, you know, we need to have the discussion about this. You know, because I talk about like what did Jesus say about cleanliness? And he got really frustrated with the religious leaders when they turned cleanliness into a spiritual issue. Like it's a good thing. Like I am never saying don't worry about your messy house, leave it messy. I've written 3 books about how to get it under control, right? And I think that there's often this misconception that people whose houses are messy must just like it that way. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We don't like it that way. And it's very offensive and actually hurtful when people assume, "Oh, you don't care." And I'm like, "Oh no, I care. I just didn't know what to do." Right? Like I didn't know how to change it and to fix it. And so having that conversation and diving deep and not just making these blanket statements is where it's at. Like have that deep conversation where we go, let's talk about what is important and let's also come alongside you and give you the real tools to make the changes that you want to make, but not out of a desire to um, please God through my house because that's not possible, right? But at the same time, you do want the help. And so it just all works together. I feel like I was
Yep.
just kind of rambling there, but
No, it all works together,
it does.
all of
Yeah.
it, all of it. And how has working through so this process and these 3 books over the course of however I mean, it's been years that you've been
Hmm.
at this game and you are an expert at this point.
Hmm.
How did that how did that how did you start making this connection and how did it help you like get to that to your the heart of your heart? How did it help you make this all more clear? Because I think that that's what I'm hearing is that you really like through all the clutter you kind of and it's what we talk about on this podcast quite a bit is just, you know, getting through all the noise, getting through all
Hmm.
this stuff, whether it's physical stuff or mental stuff or both, all of the clutter, the calendar clutter, and getting to the heart of what really matters.
Right.
How
Well,
did
I
this
had to
help you?
dig my way out of the clutter, to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of times people will be like, you got to find your why before you get started. And I'm like, no, you can get started long before you find your why. Like getting started actually helps you figure out what's going on, because like I teach a process, which is what I developed for my own clutter. And that is like I get out all the stuff that has no business being there first. But when you look at a pile or you open up a closet that's packed full, it just feels like I know there's important stuff in there. And so it feels like the whole thing is important. Therefore, it's completely overwhelming. But like I start with the trash, I just get the trash out. Start with the easy stuff that I already know what to do with. I start with the obvious donations, so I get those things out and it helps to clarify what it is that I'm going to actually have to deal with. And as I'm doing those things that are decision free, emotion free, I'm making real progress. And as I'm making progress, I'm starting to feel successful. I'm starting to feel like I can do this. I'm gaining confidence. And then by the time I get to the hard decisions, I've already made a lot of easy progress that has added up to be pretty significant. That now I'm ready to face those hard decisions, right? Because of the progress that I've already made. And so I think sometimes it's like, oh, I've got to make the hard decisions first. And you really don't. Like it often backfires when you try to do that because the hard
Yes.
decisions are hard. And so you put off making them. And so then nothing happens. And then it keeps piling up and being more overwhelming. And then you put it off even longer. So, like, just giving yourself permission to make those easy things first really, really does take you far in this whole process.
I agree. Celebrating those little wins,
Yes.
they are
Yes.
huge, and it really does. It changes your whole. It fuels it. It gives you energy for it. It changes your mindset. You realize, oh, well, I got through that. I did make that much progress on that drawer or whatever it is. Well,
Hmm.
maybe I can tackle a closet now. Maybe
Yeah.
I can tackle a hard conversation with someone. All these little wins
Yeah.
along the way, they do build our confidence. I think that's a great way to put it, as you said. And so much clarity comes from that as you start
Absolutely.
digging through it, right?
Well, even like, I always say to start with the trash. And sometimes people are horrified, like, someone has trash. And I'm like, yeah, everybody has trash, right?
Everyone
Like
does.
when
Yes.
you're looking at a cluttered space, there's trash in there. But even if you don't, even if you're like the one rare person who has no trash in there, even just looking for it is valuable because it gets you started. It also, because you're looking at individual items, looking to see if there's any trash, you're not seeing it as a pile anymore, right? And you're seeing it as individual items. So your brain just starts to go, oh, actually, not every single thing in here is as daunting as I thought it was going to be. And your brain is adjusting to be ready to keep going. And so there's so much value in those small little things that you do beyond just, okay, good, that thing is done. It actually gets you ready for, farther down in the process.
Yep. Yep. And there's just so many distractions, right? And by clearing those distractions, you
Yes,
start to make that
yes,
progress. And I think
exactly.
that that is huge. Um, there's so many little quotes that I pulled out of your book. I think you were saying, and I believe this is actually from one of your former books, Decluttering at the Speed of Life, which was excellent. You said as you got rid of these things, as you were doing this process and having these wins, you started to learn that you love space. And you were
Mhm.
shocked at the shift in your mood when you saw an open space in your home because it allowed you to really see what you had. And I could not agree more. I mean, I 100%. I think, in those piles, like we have these treasures And we all have a lot of clutter and junk as well. But if it's all mixed in, you don't know. Is that a treasure or is it junk? I don't know. I don't know the difference, or one might be covering the other. So it really helps those things pop. It helps you really enjoy them, other people to see them. It's huge. And for me personally, I think for you as well, it just offers like so much. It just gives me so much more peace and helps me feel
Yeah.
calmer and gives me that space in my mind. So even though, maybe it's my kitchen is now decluttered and just feels cleaner, more organized, and there's just less stuff, I also have that same feeling on the inside where I have this room to breathe. And that's been huge. So, a huge piece for me and my mood and the way that I'm raising my family and just all of it. So, that part really spoke to me.
Yeah, and like I didn't realize how many of my frustrations were due to the fact that that stuff was making it harder to do the things in my home, right? And one of the things that I think that happens, like that miscommunication between naturally organized people and naturally creative, highly creative, very messy people, is a lot of times people will say things like, "You can't concentrate with all that stuff there," right? What they're saying is, "I can't concentrate with all that
Right.
stuff there." I really honestly, for the people like me who have like intense clutter issues, part of the problem is that we can concentrate in the midst of the mess, right?
Which is
Like
also like a superpower for
it's
you.
a
I mean,
superpower,
yeah.
exactly. But what happens is I can zero in, and so then when somebody tells me you need to get rid of all that mess so you can concentrate, and so you'll be able to do this, that, and the other, and you're like, I'm doing all that, and that's just telling me I should get rid of it doesn't actually help me know what to do to get rid of it, right?
Right.
And so I'm zeroed in on this thing, and the mess is growing and I'm not noticing it grow until all of a sudden the first time I notice it, it's already huge and overwhelming, and I'm shutting down because it's so big. I always say I don't see incremental mess. Like I see perfectly clean and I see overwhelmingly messy and I don't see what happens in between, right? And so I think it's really important to understand that, and that because of that I didn't understand the power, how much power there would be in having less stuff so that there was less to be building up while I wasn't paying attention. You know what like,
So, how would your mood like I'm just, hearing
yeah.
it's incredible that you have this like hyper focused way of being and you can have clutter around you because I am not so much like that. I
Mhm.
want to be like that, but sometimes I can't. I'm like, why can't I just let that go? Like it's still bugging
See, and
me
I want
and
to be like you. So, we just might as well
yeah.
be good with what we are?
Exactly. We just have to that's just
Yeah,
how we're wired
exactly.
to a point,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so how did it affect your mood once you started to realize that this clutter was an issue and that having less of it was helpful? Like how did your mood change?
So I always knew that the clutter was an issue, right? I just thought that getting organized was the solution. But when I would get organized, like my mother would come and she's wonderful, right? Like she tried so hard to fix me. So I always give all those mothers, I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but yeah. But she would, and so she would organize the space, and then it would go right back to being. And so I didn't know that the actual solution I needed to do was to get stuff out. That there was no hope if I was trying to keep it, no matter what system I like, there was not a system in existence that would work for me because I just need to have less stuff. So that was the surprise to me, was that I thought I was giving up. I was like, well, you know what? I don't even have it in myself to get organized right now. I'm just going to declutter first. Like that's how bad this is. I'm just going to declutter. And I started decluttering, and the minute it was gone, like stuff started leaving, my house started to improve. And I started to actually get to the point that I always wanted to be at. And I was envisioning when I thought I needed to get organized. Right. And so I think that was the shock to me, was like just the things being gone. I went, oh, I don't have to manage and maintain that because it doesn't exist in my house. And that was the freedom, because anytime my house had been, you know, in place, I felt like I was just hanging on by my fingernails. And like any minute, it was just going to slip and slide and go right back to where it was. But once the stuff was gone, that wasn't possible anymore. And that was like, oh, I can have the space and not have the pressure of, oh my goodness, when is it going to go right back?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
huge.
And that was the major freedom that meant so much to me and was so powerful.
And it's in that, so like that peace of mind, and that's how I get to. I feel like I just feel so much calmer internally when my surroundings are calmer, and that's when I feel like I can connect with God and I can sit. My quiet time in the morning is super important to me. I always talk about it, and it's not like a big glamorous process or anything, but if I can get 5 minutes with my cup of coffee, just of peace and quiet, and that is when I read. I usually do a little Bible reading, and that's when I can connect with God. And I just feel like, okay, now I'm ready for my day, and I can move on. And again, it's a couple minutes. Sometimes it's less than 5 minutes if that's all I have, but it really sets the tone for my day. So I feel like this stuff is just really important. Like it's on such a deeper level than just the stuff in our home.
Well, and
And
I always wanted to do that, and I did do that before I started this. But then the ease of like, oh, now that things have a place to go, it just makes that time so much more peaceful because I can literally
yeah,
just sit down.
yep,
And there's always a clean coffee cup. And I don't have to shove things to the side on the table. Like I can just do the thing and it's like, oh, this thing that I wanted to do anyway is just so much easier now with less stuff. But I didn't
yes.
necessarily understand that it was the stuff that was. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's that I always thought I needed to get organized and that was the solution. But to just have it gone just freed me so much. Yeah.
Yep, I tried the same thing for years when my kids were little. This playroom was like the bane of my existence, and I was teaching full time, and I'd come home and I'd be exhausted, and I'd spend like an hour after they went to bed trying to put everything back, and all the things that you've written about in your books. I had all the bins. I tried, you know, everybody had their own shelf in the closet. I tried all of it, and it wasn't until I started to really get rid of, like, okay, they don't play with half this stuff. There's just too much. I started to see these
Yeah.
huge changes, but it took me so long
Yeah.
to figure that out. So
Well,
that's
and
why
I
now that
would
I know, it's like declutter, everyone declutter. It's
exactly,
helpful.
exactly. Like that was so incredibly powerful. Like I remember going, working on my kids' playroom, which was quite literally knee deep before I started
Oh
this.
my
Like
gosh.
it was so bad. And so they never played there. Like it was just this, I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was going to like solve all my problems
Right.
that I had this house finally
Right.
that had a playroom and I'm like, this is it. And then it was just a disaster. And so I just decluttered harder and harder and got rid of so much stuff. And I was like, oh, they don't need a playroom. They need a play space. And obviously, it's whatever you've got and whatever situation
Sure.
that you're in. But I'm like, that was the great thing about this room that I had is when almost all the stuff was gone and all there was a table and a chair and a little play kitchen and a couple of dress up things and a few toys. And they played in there like crazy all the time. But as long as it was just a place to put toys, nobody ever played out there.
Right.
And it
Nobody
was
wanted to play in the
overwhelming.
storage area, right? It's a
Exactly.
storage area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how old are your kids now? I know they're grown.
Yeah, they're old. They are 18, 21, and 23. So
Wow,
I
that's
know.
congratulations.
We will
Um,
we'll be we were empty nesters for about 2 days back in August
okay.
before so two moved out and one said, I think I'm gonna come back home. And so he was home for a semester and then he's gonna move on this coming weekend. So we'll be actual empty nesters, we think, you know. That's the thing about this phase of life is you're like,
Yes, that's what I
whatever.
hear.
I'm along for the ride.
Yep, just going with it.
It's fun.
So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how are they in terms of clutter, decluttering, managing things, like, because that's a tough, I find that to be just like a tough thing to kind of approach because you don't want to force like your own ways on them, but you also recognize this, as you said, it's like it's transformative. It is really powerful. It really can help in on so many levels, for
Yeah.
your mental health, everything by decluttering. So how are they? I don't want to put you on the spot. You don't have to tell us too much about them
Yeah,
if you
no,
don't
it's
want
fine.
to,
I
but
don't
how'd
I
you
don't
do it?
really I don't really talk much about them because I mean, that's the thing about young adults is they're like, we're our own people and we don't want to be,
Yes.
analyzed on the internet by
Yeah.
our mother.
Sure.
um,
But like
but
any tips to those of us, because
yeah,
my oldest is 16. So
yeah.
I'm right behind you. I'm just like
The thing,
a little bit behind you.
yeah, the thing that I wish that my mother had known, and my mother tried everything. So I feel like if she had known it, it would have helped. But the thing I wish that she had known, but I hadn't written the books yet, was that I have a low clutter threshold, meaning I can't handle very much stuff. So she can handle a lot of stuff. She can have a lot of stuff, keep it all under control easily. And I inherited that belief that I need to have all this stuff for all the situations, but I can't control it. So I would bring it into my house thinking that was the moral thing to do, was to go ahead and get it while it was on sale and have it ready for somebody's time of need or whatever. But then it would be in piles in my house. And so for me, I that's the thing I wish. And that's what I have tried to give to my kids. Now, I also know they're their own people and they're going to have to decide on their own. But as much as I can, I try to help them by making things as minimal as possible, especially with the moving to college and
Sure.
moving around to apartments and things. I'm like, let's keep it to the actual most basic things that we can, because I do my best to not put any guilt clutter on them, right? Like there's you can get rid of anything and I'm not going to get offended. I might have a little tears in, when I turn around, and I might cry a little bit, but like I have to let it go. It's funny because I'm moving into, so I'm 51, and so a lot of my friends are starting to be mother-in-laws, right? So for the last 16 years, I've been talking about this stuff, and I was always coming at things from the daughter-in-law perspective, right? Instead of the mother-in-law perspective. And now my friends are mother-in-laws. I'm not anywhere near being one, but um and I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is, because it is hard. It's hard when you see your kids, your
Yes.
daughter-in-laws, your son-in-laws be like, "Oh, yeah, we don't have space for that, whatever." Like it's
Yeah.
hard to see
Yeah.
that. But at the same time, I'm like, I
It's
mean, like
part of it. It's part of
yeah,
life, right?
we have to understand and respect people's, that doesn't mean that if it's me, I need to be sensitive to, that. Like that's I can only, worry about what I'm doing. But yeah, I think just trying to give them the freedom to move through life, especially this phase of life, with as little physical stuff holding them down as possible, right? So,
I love that. I think that's a
yeah.
great lesson for
Now
all
I
of
will
us
tell
that
you, here's my best tip for, since you have a boy that's 16.
my daughter is 60. I have two
Okay.
daughters, 16 and 10. My son is about to be 14.
Okay. So I don't know that this would happen with my daughter, but my oldest, and I've told this story before and he knows it, but my oldest went to college, and the spring of his freshman year, there was like a huge, huge snowstorm in Texas, right? And like, because I'm in Texas, and it was really, really bad. And his dorm was without power for a week. And it was so bad he couldn't get home or anything. So he was stuck in the dorm with no power. It's freezing cold. And so he had told us about sleeping with his coat on and everything. Anyway, he brings home at the end of the year two blankets that I had put at the top of his closet in his dorm that were still in their package. He had no idea that he had them. And I was like, "You went through Snowmageddon without knowing that you had two blankets up there." And I didn't know to tell him, right? So with my other kids, I'm like, "You have to pack. I'll be here and help you, but you're the
Yep.
one who's going to put it." I'm sorry, my eyes are watering, but you have to put it in the actual boxes because you have to know what you have. And so that was a
Yeah.
learning thing for me. I was like,
Sure.
yeah, don't pack for him. I thought I was making him pack some, but I guess I had packed those and he had no idea he had
Oh my
blankets.
gosh. Oh man.
What in the
That's
world?
yeah. Like how? How did this just
But
happen? You're sleeping with
yeah,
your coat on.
yep, yep,
Good tips. Those are really, really good tips. And you're saying about having all the stuff for all the situations, right? I mean, I've definitely tried to get away from thinking that way, but I think that we all do at some point, especially when the kids are little, because you're like, I don't want to have to buy this, like using the snow example. Like, I don't want to have to, I'm in New Jersey. We get a couple snowstorms each winter, usually. Sometimes we don't. So it's like buying all the snow gear when they're not going to be in that size again the next year. Like I was trying to, be super organized and try to label all the bins so that like my next
right,
kid could use it and find the size. But half the time it's like if you're not organized enough to keep track of it all,
And
there's
somebody
no
offers
point.
you their stuff for free, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, I'll wanna have
Yeah,
that."
I don't
Or
wanna have
yeah,
to buy those, you know? So it's
exactly.
just like, so there are certainly some huge benefits to doing that and staying on top of it, but it's like you can take it too far, right? Like, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
I might need this tool," like, I don't know, you've lived in your house 10 years, you haven't used the tool yet, you probably don't need it, or
Which is why I don't use those questions as part of my decluttering process, right? Like, so
you
I
have great questions. Can you share your questions? I want
yeah, I
everyone to
can
hear
because
them.
so
Yeah.
my tendency, like, I can come up with a reason to keep anything, right? And so that's why I had so much stuff in my house is I have a creative brain and I'm like, "Oh, you think that's trash? Well, I'll tell you what you can do with it. You can do, all this stuff." So, I had to come up with questions that don't use that, right? Like, so my question, and if I can answer this one, I don't have to even ask another one, is if I needed this item, where would I look for it first? Right. And so it is not a question of where should it be? Where should it go? Where would it be? It's literally if I didn't know where it was, because if I knew where it was, I've already taken it out in step two of my process. Right. But if I didn't know where this item is supposed to go, and I thought I was going to tear my house apart for 3 hours looking for it, what's the first drawer that I would open to look for it? And then I take it there now. Like instead of setting it aside, like, oh, yeah, I think I'll put that in the such and such, I go ahead and take it there and I face the reality of that space. Like, is there room for it? Are there 15 others once I get there? I'm like, oh, I didn't realize. Because so many times we have
Right.
no consciousness of what it is that
Yes,
we have,
that
right?
happens a
So
lot.
I get there and I'm like, okay, there's no space for it. What am I willing to get rid of to create the space for it? Like what, and if I'm not willing to get rid of something else to make the space for it, then actually maybe I don't love it as much as I thought I did, right? And so all of that helps me. It's a boundary that's outside of myself, right? Like so I get to, if the snow gear, I'm not going to, because I will go back and forth with myself for an hour on whether or not I should keep this snow gear. So instead I say, if I needed this snow gear, where would I look for it first? Okay, I would look for it first in that closet in that room. Okay, I go there. There's no space. And I'm like, oh, actually, I've already got snow gear or whatever, it's there.
Yeah.
Or I say, oh no, there's no space. What am I going to get rid of to keep this snow gear? And then I look and I'm like, oh, well, here's the outgrown things and that can go there. But when I'm not doing that and I'm just shoving things in because it's a good thing, then that's when things get out of control. But when I embrace the realities of the space and I say, this is the space I have, it needs to have a place to be if I'm going to keep it, then that's what frees me and actually moves me forward.
I love that. It's a great way to just change your thinking, and it's so practical and useful.
Yeah.
It's so practical and useful. So I think that that's fantastic advice, and I'm definitely going to start. Think I'm pretty good at decluttering, but
Mhm.
um, I think that that's just that. Where would I look for it first? That makes perfect sense. It makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. And so often we try to have these other systems and things, and then we forget, or it gets
Well, and then we say end up saying things like, "Oh, I got organized and now I can't find anything." I mean, that's like the opposite of being organized,
right.
right?
Which
But
how
it's
many times have you? I've heard people say that so
yes,
often.
right.
Yeah,
Like put
yeah.
it. I found a really good place to put
Uh-huh.
it, and now I have no idea where it is. But it's like if I'll put it in the first place where I look for it, then I actually find it in the first place where I look for it, and then that starts to build my confidence, and makes it easier as I go on.
You said something else that I would like to quote you on this because
Okay.
I loved it, and it was about minimalism. And I call myself a minimalist, not in um, I think just as you're saying with all of these things, it's your own take on it, right? Your own
Hmm.
spin, what works for you, that clutter threshold, which is different for all of us. I love that
Hmm.
term. I think that's fantastic. And I'm a minimalist. The rest of my family, not everybody, some gravitate towards it more than others, but we still have plenty of stuff. So I think some people hear that word still. I know it's pretty trendy these days, but some people hear it and think of like, you know, the person living with like a backpack and they can fit all of
Hmm.
their belongings in a backpack. And I'm not using it that way. We're still a family of
Right.
five in a 4-bedroom house. We have
Right.
stuff. But it's changed, just really thinking about what am I how you said, where would I look for this first? I take that concept to each room. Like, what am I going to do with this room in my house? What am I going to do with this stuff? Even, the holidays just came and went, like with all the holiday like decorations. Well, I love Christmas and I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. I used to be. I used to buy all the Christmas decorations, but realistically, it's a couple weeks of the year that you're enjoying these things. So I started to realize, like, okay, I'm just going to pick a few that I love the most because where am I going to store this stuff for the rest of the year? The other 48 weeks of the year, what am I going to do with
Mhm.
this stuff? And it changed the way that I think about that I approach shopping and
Mhm.
just really all of my belongings. So you were talking about minimalism and you said start erring on the side of getting rid of things. Be willing to risk not having something that you truly might wish you had one day. And you say, I love this. Maybes are no's. What ifs become, let's assume, probably nots. And wouldn't it be nice to haves turn into, I'm sure I could get replacements. And you were saying this mindset. And I think that that is just golden. And I have definitely embraced that, but it took me a long time. And yeah, the maybes or no's. And if you have to hesitate, like, oh, where would I put this? Like, I don't know, because I don't know if I'd really look for it ever. Like, that's a
Mhm.
hard no. Whereas
Yeah.
before it might have been like, oh, maybe I'll save it for one day. But I just
Right.
think it's good advice.
Well, and having that mindset and then also having real practical tools to go through it, it's like the mindset gets you ready for where would I look for, you know what? I wouldn't look for this. Actually, it would never occur to me that I already had one. So it's better for it to be gone. The other thing, too, with the minimalism is, I talk about the container concept. Like, what is the space that you have that determines how much you can keep? And so it becomes, instead of it being, an arbitrary thing like you need to get rid of anything whatever, it's like okay, I have to get rid of anything that doesn't fit, which means I can keep anything. I can keep obscure weird things, but I can't keep everything. Like I can keep
Right.
anything, but I can't keep everything. So if I try to keep it all, and then that helps to naturally sort out like what are the more important things. Like when I'm blaming the space as opposed to just saying I shouldn't have this because then I rebel against that, right? And so instead I'm just like, well, this is the space that I have, so these are the most important things to me to get space, in there.
I love that.
It's
Yep.
really helpful.
It's
Yeah.
so helpful. And everybody has to remember that it is different for each and every
Yeah.
one of us. Like depending on
Mhm.
what your situation is, depending on what your home is like. And we might have the exact same size home, but our clutter threshold is
Mhm.
incredibly different. Like you
Yep.
said, you and your mother. So there you go. It's gonna look different. And we have to just accept that. Like we have to just it's like more of a feel, I think, than a number. It's a feeling.
Yeah,
Like, well,
well,
does
it's
this
well,
feel
and it's also
comfortable?
the physical space. Like,
Yeah,
the space you have is the space you have, and you can't really argue with that. Like,
sure.
the shelf doesn't expand because I want to keep more books. The shelf is the size that it is, and so I let that make those hard decisions for me so that I don't have to. It's like, okay, these are my favorite ones. I wish I could keep more. But the reality is this is the space.
Yep.
And if I try to keep more than that, it's going to be out of control.
I love it. I love it. So, what is your what's your biggest takeaway that you want listeners to really take away from reading this new book that you wrote?
Yeah, I think it's to just understand that um, the way your brain works is not, if this is something that is not natural for you, if you're not naturally organized, that does not mean you're doomed to your house being out of control, right? It is actually better to accept the way that your brain works and use that to make progress than to wish and try to be different. I used to think that the answer to my messiness issues was for me to have a different brain, be a different person, and instead accepting how my brain actually works is the thing that helped me change my home. As long as I was wanting to be a different person, I never made progress because I was trying to do things in a way that didn't work for me. But accepting how your brain works, how God created you, is actually, incredibly freeing in
It
that.
really is. It really is, and it can change everything. So,
Yeah.
that's a wonderful message. I always ask people at the end of our interviews, what is your favorite way to slow down these days?
love to read. I am a fiction reader. I know I write nonfiction, but I'm a fiction reader.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm very I have a lot going on right now. I have a lot of these interviews. I have another book due in several months. And so I'm pretty overwhelmed, right? But I need to read to have my brain just slow down. And so I'm kind of on a Maeve Binchy kick. I don't know if you knew her,
Yep. I've
but
read a few of her books. Yeah.
I love her, but she is a very mellow writer. Like it's not a thriller at all. It's a lot of character study and it's multiple characters throughout her books. And I just enjoy them so much. And they really just help me to slow down, because sometimes I'll read a book and I'm like, I can't stop reading it because it's just like,
Yes.
what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And hers are not like that, but they just feed my soul. I love them.
Oh, I love
So,
that. I love reading too. I have one too many time. I should probably pull one of hers out. That sounds good. Because before bed, sometimes I'll read some of these like thrillers, and then I stay up way too late. I'm trying to read to wind down, and I can't help myself, and then I stay up till
yeah.
like 1 o'clock in the morning trying to finish it. So,
Yes, exactly. And so I can't afford to do that right now. So
yeah.
it's been very helpful to be reading her
Oh,
books.
I love that. Dana K. White, you have just been a pleasure to
Oh,
talk to
it
today.
was so
Thanks for
fun.
being here. And I'm going to link everything in the show
Mhm.
notes, where to find your book, where to find you. But what is the best place? I know listeners are going to want to find you. So where's the best place? Where do you hang out the most on the internet?
Well, so I'm everywhere, but my home base is a slobcomesclean.com. That is the name of the anonymous slob blog that I started back in 2009. This is my real name now. I'm not using my fake name anymore, but yeah, you can go there and it has links to my podcast and my YouTube and my books and all the different things that I do online. So,
All right.
yeah,
Thank you so much for being here today
thank
and
you.
for coming on the show.
So fun.